I was just about to do that.
The mute icon went away, so hopefully that fixed it.
So if you do hear us, if you can hear us and you're on the call, can you please just put a note in the Q&A to let us know? We'll pause for just a moment. Hopefully this was just a momentary disruption. It did just pop up, so I don't know if it's a new problem or something that's been ongoing. Again, if you can hear us and you're on the Zoom call. Oh, there is sound now. Thanks. Excellent. Thank you very much, Ms. Macaro.
So just talking a little bit about the process. So basically it's two different processes. The one on the left is a balance sheet. That's the actual revenue and expenditure that the school district sees. That's what we're going to talk about in our budget tonight. The trial balance from the county treasurer is just the statement that they send us saying, this is what we received. You sent money, you sent checks, you know, we cashed these checks, etc. So trial balance doesn't add to the revenue or expenditures that the district receives. It's a very simple process. It's revenue minus expenditure. That's what we have in our budget process. So that's really what we're talking about. Warrants payable, cash on hand, all that stuff is not actual revenue or expenditure for the district.
And just a comment, if you look at the way schools do accounting and you look at the way the treasurer does accounting, they look different, but they process the same numbers. But they look very, very different.
Yeah. And what it really is the county treasurer is just processing the activity that we produce. So, you know, they do it differently. And they also report on an annual basis where we're on a fiscal basis from September through August. They go January to December. But the reality is it accounts for the same dollars and we balance our balance sheet to their trial balance every month to make sure that the revenue they receive is deposited is the same as we tell them that we were depositing, that the warrants we send them are the same as they are cashing, so that it's that double check that it's always going to be the same. And then the auditors come in, the state auditors each year, and this is one of the main things they look at is, are we balancing to what the treasurer says? And is there any discrepancy? And, you know, those type of things, which there never is, but it's just that process. Of course, you know, we're still working on this. And then the components of the budget development, student enrollment, revenue, staffing, expenditures, fund balance. Talk about enrollment. We ended the year at about 1,152 kids in basic education and ALE combined. Different models of how we look at next year's enrollment and how we calculate that. Based on that, we also looked at our history, where have we been, to kind of see where we're going. It gives us a pattern. You can see that since 2000, we have been a district that has been becoming slimmer over time. And then also looked at patterns. We know that there's always a change from the 10th grade to the following 11th grade, kids going to Running Start, changes from, you know, 8th grade to 9th grade, those type things. So looking at the last 3 years of history, we're projecting about 1,039 students in the coming year. We currently had about 1,080. So there's a drop of 41 students roughly in that time frame. Broken down into the three entities that we have, the K-5, which is a building here, about 422 students. And we talk about students, we talk about FTE, which is full-time equivalent. That's a student that goes full-time to school because we get funded based upon seat time. So if they come half the time, we get half the funding. If they come full-time, et cetera. And then middle school in the 6th to 8th grade level, about 254 FTE, and at the high school level, about 363. So that comes to your 1,039 that we're looking at. We also have other things that we get funded for. Special education, we're looking at about 172 students in the coming year. They currently had about 180 this year. Another 10 that were the kind of pre-K kids, or included in that 172 is 10 that were pre-K, about 108 that were K-21 referred to as tier 1 and then tier 2, and it has to do with the program part of it. So that's the 172 kids. Running Start, looking at about 33 kids. Again, Running Start is a program where we receive the funding from OSBI for those students. They're attending a community college, and then we pay the community college. So if you would see a warrant on a monthly basis, Everett Community College, we're paying Everett Community College because some of our students go there and we're receiving funding to pay for that. So it's that type of situation. CTE, currently at about 68 kids. We're looking at 67 next year. And then LAP is the students, based on this year, we get funding for LAP for next year, which is the Learning Assistance Program. And so it's just a funding model that has 1,189 kids to create a formula. ALE, currently at about 72, looking at about 67 next year. Kind of see that, some of the grades are a little larger and smaller depending on how they move up, but it's pretty much just a movement of kids up and how many we think we'll have. Yes.
I'm wondering with the wait list for the ALE program, why we're expecting lower enrollment than this previous year.
I could try to answer that. I'm just looking at what we have in the program and how many we think we're coming into the program. The problem with the wait list is a lot of those kids are also in our basic education program already. So we have staffed classrooms with kids and teachers. And if we move those kids into another program that would require us to add more staffing, it doesn't change the staffing in the basic ed classroom. So if you took 2 kids out of every classroom and had another 20 kids and hired another teacher, it's going to change the staffing that we have in those classrooms. So that's kind of it. When it's just a movement of kids in the program, the other part of it is it would then reduce the funding I would see in my basic education program, even if it increased the funding in this program. So from a budget standpoint, it doesn't change the funding, actually reduces it because ALE gets funded a little lower than basic ed, but budget wise, it doesn't change that. So when we talk about the dollars that it creates, unless it's totally new students, it doesn't change the budget. Make sense?
Yeah, thank you.
Okay. So in summary, about 1,039 in basic ed, 67 in ALE, 172 in special ed, 67 in our CTE program, 7 in our bilingual program, and 33 in the Running Start. And again, when we create budgets, these are estimates. We don't actually get funded until January based on the actual numbers. So we are projecting we'll have these many kids in each of these programs, and each of these kids will generate these dollar amounts to create the revenue that we receive. We hit January, and then January through June, OSPI will recalculate our funding based upon the actual number of students. So if we have more kids in ALE at that time, they would increase the ALE funding. We get less in basic ed if there's fewer kids, that type of a scenario. So you want to make sure in the budget process that you never overestimate enrollment. Easier to underestimate and have a few extra dollars than it is to overestimate and not have enough funds to pay your expenditures.
And that's what happened this past year is you estimated conservatively and we came in over budget on our enrollment, which
Correct.
was a wonderful thing for the budget.
Yeah. Beats the alternative. So again, student enrollment drives state funding. There's a model that does that. And these are just kind of generalizations, but for every student that's enrolled, that's a full-time student in basic ed, it's roughly, $10,823, special ed, $10,667, ALE, $9,555, and the vocational program, $11,270. So we calculate the number of students times this, and it gives you roughly what we're looking at.
And the special ed is plus 10,000. It's
Special ed
the
is
same
basic ed
full-time
Plus special ed, they are both
Yeah.
of those, correct?
Just for those who are watching and haven't been at a
Up
bunch of
to-
additional ones.
To a point.
Up to a percentage.
Correct, yes. And the percentage is better than it was, so that's good. So the way the state funding works is they take the number of students you have and they multiply it by this, what they refer to as a prototypical school model that creates staffing ratios. And it'll create, you know, how many staff are being funded for basic ed, special ed, lab, et cetera. And staffing units are broken down into three classifications, and they do that because they fund them at different dollar amounts. So there's certificated instructional staff. You can kind of think of that as your classroom teacher, your lovely TOSAs, your whoever else might be in the room. And then your classified staff, secretaries, bus drivers, custodians, paraeducators, et cetera. And then certificated administrative staff, principals, and district office admin staff. So they have this model that creates the number of staffing units based on the number of students. So as an example, in elementary school, if you have 400 students, they will fund you for 1.253 FTE for principals. They will fund basically a half of a guidance counselor, 1.7 custodians. And it's not what we actually have. If you think about, you know, a building like this that has, you know, 450 kids or so in it, you get maybe a 1.8 custodian, but we're going to have at least 2 custodians because that's a minimum you can get by. You'd have a counselor, not a half a counselor, that type of thing. So the other part of it is once they figure out how many staffing units are funded, then it's how much are they going to fund you per staffing unit. And this is where we've run into problem is, you know, if we look at the staffing costs or the revenue for staffing for the last 3 years, it was pretty stagnant. And it's that reduction that we kept seeing in the funding model. And then, you know, the problem we see now is if you look at the IPD, which is the amount that we increase salaries by, it's 5.5, 3.7, plus any negotiated amount on it. And not everybody gets funded. If we looked at the model, you will see that, and it's kind of hard to see because there's so much on there. But if you look at the funded amount, you'll see that, let's see if I can increase that. Did you move it over? See that, you know, for principals, we're funded for about 4, we have 4.5, and that includes, you know, a TOSA director type position in there. And then the certificated staff below that in classroom teachers, et cetera, it's kind of broken down by categories. We're pretty good in that area. You know, we have funding for about 75.8, we're at about 76.2. There's only about a half an FTE that the district is funding. That's not completely accurate because that's the staffing. It isn't the actual cost of the staff because we may pay more than we receive. But anyways, it's the classified area. We look at that middle part, you can see that between the buildings and the district level staffing, there's 14.5 plus 7.7. But if you look at the buildings, there's 27.7 FTE in classified staff. So we are over by over 13 FTE. And again, an FTE isn't for classified staff, it's not a person. Classified staff is based on 2,080 hours a year, which is 8 hours a day, year round. A lot of our people don't work that. So if you think about 13 FTE, you're probably talking about 25 people. And then on the district level, you know, there's another, you know, 3.8. So in classified staff, we are quite underfunded. And a lot of that has to do with special education, that it's not fully funded, and we pick up a lot of that cost in there. So basically the 3 categories in the bottom, you can see that in certificated staff, we're slightly over administrative staff, about 1.3, but it's at 16 FTE in classified staff that are not funded by the state at all. So we're picking up 100% of the cost of those salaries and benefits, and then we're picking up a percentage of the others based upon the funding model. So when we started looking at, and that's why, you know, salary and benefits are such a large part of our budget. Anyways, but it's just going back to that prototypical school model. It's not a model that's going to allow districts to maintain what they have because it doesn't fully fund education.
And it's particularly bad with classified, as you demonstrated, and paraeducators in particular. It's and health services. Mr. Carruthers, you had a comment or question. Let's get a mic real quick for those online or watching later.
Well, the federal government doesn't contribute, or this classified staffing?
No, there is no funding that is used for classified staffing. We get some funding for some certificated staffing, specialized programs, special education, the title remediation program. Those pay for 3 certificated staff, but there is no funding for classified. And when we're looking at this, we're looking at what is the state responsible for and what are they funding and how much are they funding? And we're not alone to be underfunded by this amount for classified staff. Most districts that I have conversations with, about half of the classified staff are paid for at the district level. It just, and it isn't that we have too many of them. You know, we're really lean as a district as far as our staffing. It's just that the state does not fully fund. You know, they keep talking about not fully funding special education. That's one of the biggest things, is that if you look at this, they fund roughly 2 FTE in special education. 2. That's not a lot of support in a classroom with kids. So based on all those factors, we create our revenue, which we've talked about before. And we have 5 different classifications. We have our local property taxes, our local district generated funds, state apportionment based on students, state funding for categorical programs, again, based on students, and federal funding for categorical programs. You see that the green and the purple is state funding. So roughly, 60% or so comes from the state for apportionment, another 16% for special purpose, and the rest is federal funds and local property taxes and non-local. So about 20% of our budget is actually coming from our community. First is the levy funds, and we use those for a variety of things. It's athletic programs, it's staff that we've talked about that are not funded or they're underfunded. The underfunding of materials, supplies, and other costs. Utilities and insurance takes up all the funds that we receive from the state. So if we're buying paper, if we're doing anything other than just those 2 things, we're paying for it out of the levy funds. Food service and people transportation, both of those exceed the revenue that we have for them. So we support those. And then anything that's negotiated, that's above and beyond what the state pays for, all comes out of levy funds.
Including some things that they mandate and do not pay for.
Correct. Yeah. And I won't go into the levy, but this is one of my heartburn issues for us, is that the local levy is limited in our district to a per pupil amount because of the value of the property in our community. And because it's limited to a per pupil amount, as we get smaller, we can collect less and less dollars. And I won't even talk about the $1 million that they took and then gave back to us in a different format, but it limits what we can do. So we have a voter approved levy of $3.5 million for the coming year, 3.4 for the previous year. Because we are in a split year, September, we get part of that from the fall levy and part from the following spring. It's about $3,459,023. So that's our local levy funds that we receive. And it just kind of a comparison. It's been pretty similar, about 3.4 million roughly for the last several years. Even though that the rate goes up a little bit each year, the fact that we have fewer students offsets that increase. So we're never seeing a levy increase, which makes it difficult to pay for those additional costs, because those additional costs of salaries continue to rise with no revenue to offset it. Then we have the local, what they call non-tax, and that's the stuff that we generate locally. It's donations to the district, it's our rental fees, it's food service fees. So if you're paying for your meal, it's any student fees, investment earnings, those type things. The only real difference here is the traffic safety program. We're not offering that currently, so we didn't budget for it, but everything else is pretty similar. It's about $560,000, with about $300,000 of that being rental income between Bayview and the community center. And then another about $100,000 or so from our food service program, and 70,000 in grants, and then the rest generated in the buildings as they sell things. State apportionment, again, it's students times that staffing ratio creates these allocations for those that are funded. So the first two are basic education and special education, which are our guaranteed based on enrollment. So we estimate this, and again, they recalculate it, but we're looking at what we refer to as basic education funding of about 11,792,000, slightly above where we were this year. But if you go back to the 2021 actual, you'll see it's less than we had 3 years ago. So it isn't like our revenue is increasing over time as costs increase over time. And then special education at 329,740, that's just one piece of the special education funding. But again, if you go back several years, you're at 464,000. So again, less. The bottom part is categorical funding. So it's funds that are generated for specific purposes, has to be used in those, and we're audited that we use those in those areas. So the first one is our special education program, state funding, a little over $2 million. So that actually was an increase. And that's because they changed the formula slightly and they increased the percentage that we can collect. We're no longer limited to 13.5%. It's a higher percentage, allows us to generate a little more money. The learning assistance program, about $304,681. A lot of these are tied to our free and reduced percentage. It has gone up in the last year by a couple percent. And so that increases this funding model a little bit. So even though the number of students are slightly less than we've had in the past, because the amount it's being funded by is increased because of the free and reduced percent, which is roughly 31% now, and it was 28%, a year ago. We get a little more money in those categories. Then they have national board bonus. We have a couple teachers that are nationally certified. We get the money, we give it to them. It's just a flow through. The OSSI, we had talked about that earlier. We're getting a $27,000 grant to help offset costs of that. There's an outdoor ed grant that's predominantly used in this building for about $35,000. Couple small grants in there. Then we have a state homeless student stability, kind of a homeless program grant of about $56,000. That one keeps going down over the last couple of years. And these are all grant funded.
It goes down despite the population going up.
Yes. Yeah. It just has to do with the amount of money the state's sending out. We have no control over that. We apply for grants and that's it. The bilingual program actually is going up because we increased by 3 kids. We have 7 instead of 4. So, it's a difference. Highly capable stays about the same, usually about 40,000. It hasn't changed much over time. School food service, we get a little bit of money from the state, about $3,000 roughly as a reimbursement. It's very small. Looking at transportation reimbursement, this is the money for the operation of the transportation department. This is one that's hard to calculate. We're going to a single bus run, which means we're going to cut our mileage in half. And the way it's calculated, it's based on the number of miles you drive, the number of students that are on the bus, all those variables, but it's a program that was created, I think, in 1772, and nobody can tell you how it works. So you can't, no, seriously, you can't replicate it. They have a program it's on an Atari, honest to God, it really is, that they do this with, and nobody even in OSBI knows how to calculate this other than inputting stuff into this old Atari. So I'm guessing at the $725,000 because I don't know what this is going to look like. I know it's not going to be 900,000 because of the fewer miles. So this one's a shot in the dark. And then there's a state grant that we think we'll get that's about 50,000. It's not for sure at this time, but that's about 3.3 million, similar to where we've been in the past with our categorical state funds.
I appreciate you taking that hypothesis on what that amount is going to be, even though there's no way of really knowing.
There's no, everything else is formula driven and I can replicate it. I've never been able to do this. I've tried for 19 years. I've never been able to figure this one out. I don't know how it works. And this is federal funds, and you'll see this is where we are going to have, the reduction in there. I'm missing some of the ones that were there last year. Anyways, there's about $1.4 million in that black area. There's some more that are closed up, but anyways, that's where We are seeing a little bit more in some of our federal grants. Again, it has to do with that free and reduced percentage. So that'll increase our IDA potentially a little bit, our title program a little bit. The reimbursement for the school lunches is about 135,000. So these are all federal programs. Again, very specific. We can only spend them in that particular category. They're ones that I claim on a monthly basis. We have to spend them first, that type of a process. Very highly regulated. This is one of the big areas where we get audited that causes heartburn for me because there are so many regulations and rules around these dollars. But again, you see it drops from 2,172,000, about 1,114,000, and it's the loss of those ESSER funds over time. So if we add all those together, we're looking at a budget of revenue of about $20,744,487, which is less than the previous couple of years, even less than the 1920 total. So based on the fact that, with that prototypical school funding model and fewer kids, our revenue just doesn't change over time. And that's why we're running into some of these budget issues of, how do we balance if expenditures continue to increase with cost of living and revenue doesn't change. So then we get into the expenditures, which is broken down into salaries and employee benefits, supplies, professional services, and travel. Few definitions. When we talk about employees, we talk about salary and district paid benefits. And the district paid benefits are things like FICA, Medicare, retirement, kind of your tax stuff, paid family medical leave, workers' compensation, and then things like medical insurance, VIVA, which is a health retirement account that we provide money, employee assistance funds, or healthcare administration. Healthcare has to do with the medical insurance through the SEB program. And you can see the percentage. Some are percentages of salaries and some are just straight dollar amounts. Every employee that works more than 630 hours gets medical, and it costs us $12,200 per person. So that type of a thing. So those would be the benefit costs. And then we have what they refer to as MSOCs, which is material supplies, other costs. Those are the non-employee costs. It's your classroom supplies, curriculum, library materials, technology support supplies such as copy machines, paper, toner, the cleaning of your buildings, the school bus facility maintenance supplies, fuel for your school buses, liability insurance, state audit fees, legal fees, utilities for PSE, oil, propane, our maintenance contracts for our fire alarm, our septic systems, our heating systems, travel reimbursements, conference costs, all those other things that are not directly tied to an employee. We break expenditures down by three different categories. And the first is program. So we have what they refer to, and these are OSBI's labels: regular instruction, special education, vocational, compensatory grants, which is basically grants, other instructional programs, community services. You can see that 53% of our funds go to regular instruction, another 14% to special education, and 23% is support services. And I'll kind of give you a breakdown of what those are. Comparison to last year, you can see that our instruction's going up slightly, 313,000. Our federal programs are going down dramatically. That's because we lost all that funding. So we moved some of those costs to other places or eliminated those costs where we could. Special education goes up slightly. A vocational program, because it has more kids at a higher dollar amount, goes up slightly. Based on the number of state grants we have, and the fact that the free and reduced number increased those a little bit, we go up slightly. The other instructional programs, other types of grants, we go down a little bit. And community services, which is basically the community center, goes up slightly. And support services, which are all the support costs in the district, it's going to be your budget, superintendent budget, my business office budget, the custodians, the maintenance, the food service, and transportation. That goes down slightly. So you see we're reducing expenditures from last year by a little over $1.2 million. And that doesn't include the escalation we would have seen based on the cost of living. So the reality is we really looked at about $2.3 million change in our budget had we moved everything forward and then reduced from there. So regular instruction is basic education, and alternative education. You can see the changes in there. And then we talk about the federal special purpose monies. This is where you see those big reductions. It's those ERA funds, the ESSER funds, CARES Act, all those things, 664,000, 606,000, 383,000, 144,000, big reductions in funding. And then we get into special education, and it increases slightly in there at both the state and the federal amount, about $100,000. Vocational program goes up, and then the grants, we have the federal grants, the Title I grants, basically remediation programs, Title II, which is another federal program, the Learning Assistance Program, which is a state program. You kind of see some of those increases. Some of those in Program 58, special and private pilot programs, are new programs. So that one changes from year to year based on the grants we may or may not receive. And then CPWI, which is used about a $10,000 increase. So there's another grant that we have. And then we start talking about traffic safety going down, but high cable went up a little bit. Community center goes up a little bit. And then the support services, that's that breakdown. If we look at district-wide support, that's program 97. So that's going to be all of our budgets plus the custodians, plus the maintenance, plus the et cetera. Also looking at food service, seeing a slight reduction there. We did a consolidation, had an employee retire, and rather than hiring a new employee, we spread the hours out to existing employees to cover that, which saved us, $20,000 in medical and VIVA and all the things that go with that. So that worked out well. And then people transportation, that single bus run is going to limit hours for us and also reduce costs, fuel, et cetera. So that's how we get to that reduction on the different programs. We also break down then by activity. So if we look at our account code, everything we look at has an account code in our accounting system, and it has a program, activity, object code, location code, and a sub fund at the end. And sub fund is basically, is it local funds or are they state or federal funds? And the only purpose of that, it doesn't create more funds for more money. It's just an accounting thing that says, oh, this should be paid for with the local levies. It's negotiated salary increase or whatever it might be. It's something that the legislative body uses to see how we're using our levy funds. It doesn't do anything other than that. So it breaks down again, and we look at that. You have your teaching activities. You can see that went down by 2.9%. Teaching support down by 12.9%. Some of that is things, and we'll see in a minute, but it's reductions of paraeducators, it's reduction in some of the healthcare people that we added because of COVID. We've gone back to, one registered nurse in every building as opposed to what we had before. Supporting activities going down, building administration down by 14.3%. So we made reductions in that program. About 8.3 in central administration. So that's the district office. We eliminated a position. We're reducing a second position. And then about a 5.6% reduction from the previous year. The reality is the reduction was larger than that had we inflated everything with the cost of living and all those types of things that we would have done. So teaching, you have basically, two areas in there. Teaching activity 27 is going to be teachers and paraeducators. So you can see that went down. Extracurricular is basically an athletic program, and stipends and a few other things that are kind of non-teaching. So if you get a stipend for a building leadership team or something, it would fall in that category. But we're down about 307,000 roughly in that particular category, one of the smaller reductions as we went through the budget process. And then we got into learning resources. We reduced a library aide 3 hours a day, guidance and counselor. We had, with a consolidation of buildings, we have one less counselor position. Health services actually even went up, even though we reduced some things in there. Curriculum, we're budgeting 100,000 for curriculum for next year. This year we had budgeted 200, so we're expecting to spend less money since we did a lot of that curriculum adoption currently. Professional learning, that actually will increase. It's just a transfer of staff time when we get to that point. And then supporting activities down about 200,000, and that's going to be things like food, it's commodities we receive by the federal government, expecting, more of those than we had in the previous year. Operations is the cost of our food service program. Transportation is the biggest drop in there. And again, that has to do with, we're going to drive half as many miles, spend half as much time on the road as we currently are. Insurance is one of those that, going up dramatically. The cost to transportation alone is $50,000. If we get to insurance down below, it's another $23,000. There's a $75,000 difference in insurance. Maintenance of buildings, operation of plants. You can see that each of those have a little bit of change based upon what we thought was the appropriate staffing level, or looking at costs that we had incurred that maybe we don't have to buy something that we had purchased in the previous year, those type of changes to it. Building administration, you can see that goes down about a little over $205,000. Central administration by about $177,000. And that gives you your $1.261 million in reductions that we're making. Again, it always balances, but it's just another way of looking at it. And then object code. This is what we normally talk about. This is certificated salaries, which are, again, we talk about teachers, TOSAs, principals, anybody that has a certificate, and then classified salaries, and then the employee benefits that go with that, which is roughly 83% of our total budget, and then supplies, professional services, and travel. And professional services is one that we struggle with, because that's where your insurance and your utilities that we don't have a lot of control over and that continue to rise, reside. So just a real quick, you can see that certificated salaries down 1.7%, classified 7.3%, employee benefits 14.4%. And I'll point out in a minute why there's such a big drop in that. Supplies going down, services going up because of some of the costs we talked about, and then travel going up, and that's because we didn't really have much travel in the previous year. So there's that same percentages. Costs. But it's kind of look at, what are employee costs and non-employee costs. And you see how employee costs over time has continued to rise. And we have made reductions in the coming year. It's substantial reductions to get that. So it's very similar. So when I talk about benefits, you see that they go down almost $772,000 from the previous year. Even though, salaries went down slightly, the biggest difference is retirement rates. The retirement rates dropped about 5%. The state has got to a point where they feel like they're funding their retirement system so they can back off, where it used to be almost 15% for a certificated staff that we'd pay in retirement rates on their salary. It's now about 10% roughly. So that saved us a lot of money across the board. And then anything that is based on number of people, like medical insurance, we have fewer people, we're going to pay less medical. Even though it goes up slightly, the number of people offset that difference. And then retirement and FICA and Medicare are predicated upon salary. So the fact that we're reducing salary changes that too. So this has actually been very beneficial, especially the retirement part of it is like, yes, we're going to get less money, but we're also going to pay less money. And again, you remember that we're paying this percentage on all salaries, not just the funding we receive. So we're actually, coming out in a better position by them reducing that rate, because all the staff that are not funded or not fully funded, we're saving 5% on all those salaries. Legal requirement. I am required to tell you how much we receive from the state for material supplies and other costs. It's $1,514,587. We are budgeted to spend $2,356,623. So the district is picking up $842,000 of those costs. It's just one of those things I am required to tell you. Not that it makes a big difference, other than it again points to the fact that we are underfunded by the state. Other funds, capital projects. Okay, so it can only be used for technology and for the repair of buildings. I can't hire a teacher to work in a classroom with these dollars. Looking at revenue from property taxes of about $2,249,999, $20,000 for investment earnings, which is much higher than previous years, because right now interest rates on investments are much better than they have been. So we're looking at beginning that plus fund balance of about $4,419,999. And then spending most of that, I've earmarked more for capital projects next year and less for technology. And some of this is carryover. It's things that we have going now. We're just re-roofed the front of this building, and next week they're going to start putting on solar panels. May or may not get that paid by the end of August, depending on when they get the work done. So it'll probably go in next year's budget. So that's why there you see a carryover about $2 million. And we always budget to spend all of it. We may not actually spend all of it depending upon the timing of projects, but it's capacity to do that. Debt service. We're going to start with almost $2,000 in there. We're transferring $87,000 from capital projects, a little bit of investment earnings. So it gives us a little over $89,000. And our final payment is $89,250. So at the end of next fiscal year, we will no longer have any debt service. The local payment, which is for the energy retrofits we had done, we did about $1.8 million. If we remember, we borrowed about 800,000 of that from the state, and the other half was through grants, will be totally paid off. So yay, earn your mortgage, we're debt free, right? Not that we have a lot of debt, but yeah, it's very minor.
Question about that process. Is that something we could take advantage of for these newly upcoming state mandates for energy efficiency?
You can, you have to have some way to pay for it. And with this particular program, we saved enough in energy use to make the payment. We were saving about $100,000 a year in energy from the prior year costs, which we use that to make the payments basically. So in the general fund, we'd have to have some way of making those payments. That's, you can borrow money, but you have to have some way to pay it. That's the bottom line.
Gotcha. Thank you.
So our last payment, so in December, we pay an interest payment, and then next June, we will pay the final payment, and then this one will be done. ASB, budgeting about $200,000 in revenue and about 180,000 in expenditures. And then when the students come back, I will actually give this back to them and have them go through and really work through this so that it is their budget, and, because they're the ones that are managing it. I just create a budget so that they have one in place to use, and then they will actually spend time working on this.
So you basically put in the guardrails of this is how much you have to spend, and then they decide how they're going to spend it.
Well, no.
Yeah.
This is how much capacity you have.
Right.
That's all I'm doing is creating capacity.
Got
Because
it.
with ASB, if you don't generate revenue,
Right.
you can't
Right.
have expenditures.
Right.
Because you're going to run out of money.
Yep.
You're going to use whatever fund balance you have, and then you're out.
Right.
So it's really just creating an empty box saying, here's your box. You guys fill out how much you're going to generate, how you're going to generate it, how you're going to spend it, that type of thing.
Excellent. I really appreciate the effort you've gone into to bring the students into that process. I know that our student representatives have been very complimentary about that process and getting more say in that. So I think that's fantastic.
Well, it's their process.
Yeah.
I just manage it.
Mhm.
They actually own it. So, yeah.
And we've got a question.
So the students, in this particular case, they're starting with 123,000. Is that correct? So that's from the previous year?
Correct. That's what I'm expecting, that their fund balance will be at the end of August. It's not there yet. It's maybe 100,000, but in August, they bring in a bunch of money for the fall for sports. So I'm expecting they'll start with that dollar amount.
So they don't lose money if they budget properly and they make money as they've done here. They don't lose it.
No.
Like in other positions where if you don't use your money, then it goes into the
Oh.
general fund.
No. This has to stay in its own fund. It cannot go anyplace else. And it's a fund that rolls over from year to year. So whatever they end up with is what they begin with the following year. They add revenue, subtract expenditures. They end up with a dollar amount that rolls over the following year. So all these funds are separate funds and they don't commingle. General fund can put money in other funds, but it doesn't work the other way. Transportation vehicle fund. Expect to have almost 300,000 by the end of the year. depreciation of about 189,000. That'll put us about 488,000 available. I've included the purchase of the current school bus we have coming in here because I'm not sure when it's going to show up. So it's just capacity to purchase that. We're supposed to be getting the check for the current bus anytime, though our bank turned it away today for some reason. But the nice part about that is we will actually be getting those funds in advance, so that'll be helpful. Anyway, so this is for the purchase of buses, and basically what we do is we save up enough money till we can afford a bus, and then we, get more depreciation, and it just continues on in that particular thing. I always budget the maximum amount I think we can generate in order to have the capacity to buy it. If we don't get the funds, we don't buy it. Yes.
I see a lot of advertisements for school bus drivers. Apparently, we're having a problem. What's the problem? Other than you don't have the drivers, is it a lack of incentive, or is it too hard, or the kids misbehaving? What's going on?
I think from what I see is I think we're changing our demographics. Most of our bus drivers we're getting anymore are retired. We're not getting, traditionally we'd get younger people that would want to be a bus driver. And if I'm being honest, it's hard to live on the salary of a bus driver. It's 5 hours a day, 180 days a year. So I'd have to check, but it's probably 24 to 34, something like that. But it's not a lot of hours. That's the problem with, a bus driver is you almost need a supplemental income to do it. And those that have that aren't necessarily interested anymore of being a bus driver. So it's harder to find people that want to do the work. And it's not an easy job. You're going down the road with 50 kids in a bus. So, I give bus drivers a lot of credit. It's a tough job.
Is there overtime pay?
Yes, you get paid. Well, you get paid for the number of hours you work. So if you drive a field trip and you work an extra 8 hours, yes, you're gonna get, time and a half. If you go into that category, or if you work on the weekend, it's double time, or, it depends on how many hours you work. But I really think it's like everything else. We're having a hard time getting substitutes in a lot of jobs that we have in the district. And I think it's just a change in our demographics that we have here.
And it's not just the school district either. In my other life, I run a small business that looks for short hour workers as well, the snack bar people at the theater. And it's difficult to find them because it is short hours each week. And it pretty much doesn't matter how well you pay them if they're only getting a certain number of hours a week.
The other thing, if you think about a bus driver, we have them work 2.5 hours in the morning, from 6 to 8:30, and then they come back again at 2 o'clock and work till 5 or something like that. So it's a split day, few hours in the morning, few hours in the afternoon. So has traditionally been a difficult position to get people to work.
There are a lot of private vehicles at the high school. My guess is that eats into the bus driver business. Do we encourage or discourage, or just be quiet about kids driving to school?
Well, I'm not the high school principal, so I couldn't answer that one for you.
I can tell you, as the parent of an elementary school student, I am neither encouraged nor discouraged to drive my child to school.
I'm just thinking about the cost. It used to be, I don't know if you're still doing it, advertising for people to use the bus this week, so we'll have a higher count. Is that still going on?
No, actually, we never should have done that. No, seriously, we shouldn't have. We count every single day, and then we take the highest 3 days in a row out of the year. But technically, we should never have encouraged people to ride the bus this Monday through Wednesday for a funding purpose.
I know it's a difficult topic, but one of the features of the bond is redoing a great big parking lot at a significant expense. and we want to have our young people free and all that kind of stuff. Is there any effort to influence riding the bus, pro or con, or driving to school?
No.
It's just up to the individual.
We want to allow families to do what they feel is
Have-
best for their
have-
students.
Have we considered charging a parking fee for those students who drive to school when a bus is available for them?
We haven't had a parking fee for probably 15 years. And at that point we had, because the parking lots were overflowing with students. Now the parking lots are a third full, so we have stopped, charging students to park in basically an empty parking lot.
Well, I don't want to take too long, but it is a convenience to have your own vehicle. But it's also a convenience to provide a place for it to park in. So it seems like there may be some room for increasing a little responsibility, I guess is the right word I'd use.
It's an interesting thought for an additional revenue stream. Also, I don't know that that's something at the board level that would be discussed. That's something that the administration could decide to do or not to do
Just,
on their own.
just a tidbit. The parking lot's half empty, even with students driving to school. And it would give us something else we'd have to monitor if we were going to make sure that those who park there had paid to park. I don't know the benefit of encouraging people to ride or not ride a bus. We've always allowed people to do what they think is best for their family. So I don't know if you want to change that mantra.
And if we had a significant increase in bus ridership, we would have to shift routes and additional costs there. So I'm sure that it's something that they'll consider now, but I wouldn't put it at the board level of budget. I think that's a line item that they can decide.
Speaking as a parent at the elementary and middle level, like students who are not yet old enough to drive, I think there's like a natural disincentive to having too many parents drive because the drop off line gets really long. And I start to think like, wouldn't it make more sense to put my child on the bus? So I think it reaches a natural equilibrium of those who can either like time or money wise, like quote unquote, afford to drive their child versus put them on the bus.
I would say too that there are layers of power and privilege in charging for parking, things like parking, to get into a public building and utilize that building as a minor. Some kiddos cannot sensorily be on a bus for whatever reason. It might be too loud, or it may be too confined, or they may not have access for other reasons. So that sends us down the road of not including every student in the process of being able to make choices about how they get to the building.
Thank you for bringing that up. That's a really important thing for us to keep thinking about as we're talking about these things, is those who are most impacted by these. Thank you.
So a summary of all the funds, you can see that the general fund actually is less than the current year budget and also less than 2 years ago actual. But totally, if we look at all budgets all together, we're looking at $26,272,547, including capital projects, ASB, transportation, and debt service. And this is just referred to as a certification page. It's something we do to OSBI that basically shows the beginning fund balance, the revenue that's added to it, the expenditures, and to make sure there's not a negative fund balance at the bottom for any of those accounts. And you can see how they all work. 4-year budget. So we're going to look quickly at that. A lot of assumptions in a 4-year budget. So the first is enrollment. And just basically, I just went through and rolled kids ahead rather than doing a big analysis of do we lose or gain or whatever. But if we just roll kids ahead, you see that, in 4 years from now, we're about 974 students. My unprofessional opinion, I think that's where we'll probably end up at, kind of where we bottom out at, is about that range. I've been looking at that for the last 10 years. And then I really thought it's going to be around that range somewhere. And then if you add ALE in there, you're about 1,067. So just, a little larger than 1,000 kids. Still, want to maintain more than 1,000 because it's kind of that level, but that's where I think it's at. Based on that, we look at what the revenue projection would be, and you can see that the revenue actually doesn't change much. Even though the funding levels go up a little bit, we can actually probably increase our local taxes a little bit based upon CPI increases and things like that. But we're not seeing a big change in our revenue. So we have to make sure that, we're looking at a program that runs about that level. Looked at 4% inflation for next year, 2% inflation for expenditures. And again, just a generalization. Based on that, we'd have to reduce next year about $1.2 million. And then based on enrollment numbers, probably 275,000 next year, 437,000 if those enrollment numbers are going to be accurate. But again, I don't put a lot of stock in going out multiple years in any type of projection, but it gives you the idea of what we're looking at. Pretty stagnant type revenue.
And this is with a fund balance beginning around 5 million.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. And with that, you can see that the fund balance, would drop to maybe about 2.5 million over time. We'd be using, some fund balance as we went through that process.
And that's still about 10%.
Correct.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So still
So
well
we're
above
still
the 6%.
fine
Yeah.
financially, but it's just the bottom line is that, in the coming years, you still have to make adjustments.
Yeah.
It isn't a one and we're done in
Right.
this type of a process unless our enrollment stabilizes.
Mhm.
Once that happens, that changes
Right.
things a little bit.
Yeah, and I really appreciate the foresight provided to create this slow slope to that balance point.
Yeah.
That I think that a lot of districts haven't had the benefit of that leadership and foresight from this administration to put us into a position where even after 20 years of enrollment reduction, the school will still have a fund balance of 10-ish%.
So capital projects, just basically extrapolated the 2.25 million over the next 4 years, and we're going to spend whatever we receive. So, if the levy becomes larger or smaller or doesn't have one, we would adjust expenditures. So we're going to spend what we have. Debt service, nothing goes beyond this year, so it'll be gone unless there is a bond that would change this projection. ASB, just pretty much maintaining over time, the same type of thing. And then the transportation vehicle fund, looking at the revenue we expect and when we could afford to buy, probably every other year we could afford to buy another bus or something like that, unless we get another grant or something in the meantime. That's it. Everything is on our website. So if you were to go to this link, you would see there's a document on there that's yeah. So there's the official OSBI document, and it goes on for 155 pages. But it it will have basically everything I've shared with you. So, like here's the revenue and expenditure by account and, all those different things. But it also goes into more detail. It'll tell you how many staff members by program and all those things. So it has a lot more detailed information. If anybody's interested, it's out there. Doesn't, it's basically what we've talked about, but it does have more if you're really interested in, how many teachers, how many paraeducators, how many whatever in program 1, basic education, it would tell you things like that. But just lots of pages of documentation.
Mr. Carlos, you had a question?
Would you explain, Dan, the limitations again on the levy? You went over that.
Yeah.
Briefly.
So basically, the limitations on the levy are one of two things. Well, depends on whether you're Seattle or not. It's a dollar amount per $1,000 of assessed value, say $2.50, times the value you have in the district. But because our district is worth $703 billion, that would generate $20 million for us. So the state says, well, you can't do that. That wouldn't be fair to the districts that can't raise funds. So we're going to limit you to a dollar amount per student, roughly $3,000 per student. So we take the number of students we have and say we have 1,000 students, $3,000, we can generate $3 million in levy property taxes. It's right now about 3.5 million for us. But the thing is that, 5 years ago, we were collecting almost $4.2 million. So we're collecting a lot less levy funds than we did several years ago. And the other problem is because it's based on the number of students, a district that gets smaller over time, we don't collect any more money. So if we're paying salary out of that for employees that aren't funded by the state who are getting salary increases, all those things, we're not getting more money to pay that. So we have limited revenue with increasing expenditures. So that's the bottom line with the problem with that.
We have a question from someone watching on Zoom, Gwendy Hastings Freeland. Can anyone give information on why the early childhood program is no longer being offered at the school? I thought that program was expanding. Now I hear the district office is moving to the middle school. I will note that Skagit Valley College abruptly ended the program that they were providing at our school, but then I'll turn it over to Dr. Moshe to answer the rest of the question.
So the district has no control over ECAP. That was the early childhood program run by Skagit Valley. They chose to close their doors. We found out mid-June. In actuality, the district is seeking to open a transitional kindergarten program of our own. So if anyone is listening and is interested and has a child that is at least 4 years old by August 31st, that may be a program you're interested in. It is at no cost to folks because it would be run by the public school and paid for by the district. That being said, any student with an IEP who is 3 or 4 years old does have services provided by the district and can reach out to me if they have questions. When it comes to space, we have plenty of space at the South Campus and a classroom for that transitional kindergarten adjacent to that preschool playground. As for the district offices, completely separate and apart from the preschool opportunity, the district offices were moving from the transportation department to the principal's office and surrounding offices in what is known as the D pod of the South Campus. And all of the technology utilization in the high school for the tech office is moving to the transportation department because the high school needs space. The 5th and 6th grade classrooms moved out of the South Campus, 3 classrooms up to the K-5 building now, and 3 sections over to the 6-12 campus or the middle high school campus. So those are unrelated events, but hopefully that gives enough explanation as to the moves versus what's happening with preschool.
And for those who are interested in that transitional kindergarten class, how should they get in touch?
They can go to the website. We have a form for registration. They can contact me directly. We're hoping to fill that classroom. We know there are at least 13 students who were planning to attend ECAP, and we've reached out to them. Hopefully they'll take us up on transitional kindergarten if they're eligible in terms of age. And again, we're looking to create that program and get it started by September. So the more quickly folks register, the more quickly we know we can get that online.
And thank you for the prompt to discuss that. Did you have something you wanted to?
I did. I also wanted to clarify that my understanding is you're also working with campus partners like Readiness to Learn, possibly Mother Mentors, and reaching out to folks who may have access to kids and families of that age group.
Thank you, Anne. Yes, indeed. We have a partners meeting on the 18th. I'm not sure exactly what time. It's a Zoom meeting and all those partners have been invited. So Readiness to Learn will be there. The local preschools have been invited. And anyone who has an interest can certainly contact me, but this is not meant to take the place of any preschool program. This is meant to enhance the opportunities, especially for students who don't have access to preschool, because most of our preschool partners charge for students. This would be free of charge, and there are criteria, and that criteria is listed on the website. So folks are encouraged to go to the website and take a look.
And most of those preschools also have multi-year wait lists.
They do have wait lists, and we're asking the preschools actually to spread the word, and they're happily doing that. They know that we're doing this because there's a need.
Thank you.
Is there a cost benefit analysis for this daisy chain of moving from your office to the wherever it's going and the other, this daisy chain of move? Seems like you've operated very efficiently at the transportation department.
So it's a necessity because the high school needs the space. And it's a necessity because we moved out of those physical facilities to save dollars. So yes, there's actually a cost savings to the moves, but they are moves.
I was wondering if there's documented cost benefit analysis.
I did
done.
not, but Dan, do we have a documented cost benefit analysis?
We do not, but there's also an academic reason for doing this. Superintendent Moshe is also going to be in charge of special education, and being located on campus with students is an appropriate place for somebody who is supervising staff.
One of the reasons I ask is because I have friends who have asked me, why is this happening? And they don't understand it. So if there were a cost benefit analysis that detailed the benefits and the costs.
There is no cost benefit analysis. I can tell you all the reasons why we did it. We didn't put pencil to paper except for the closure of the 5-6 campus.
So is it safe to say that if you didn't do this move, the middle high school facility would not have the space to house the incoming sixth graders?
That's correct.
Okay, well then
They-
the cost benefit is the cost benefit of the reconfiguration, because the reconfiguration would be impossible without making this move.
That is true as well. Again, we have a variety of very sensible reasons for doing it. It's not just to move to a different office. We needed the space in the high school. So the technology folks are vacating that space. They needed a place to go. It made the most logical sense for them to be where all of their hardware is located, where all of the servers are located. That's in the transportation office. And to Dan's point, I'm going to be doing a different level of supervision. Now I'm adjacent to the building I'm going to most closely be working with in terms of special education. So I'm right next to it. The space that was vacated in the South Campus made perfect sense to move into.
I have no argument with the benefits. I'm just wondering what's the cost?
I would just like to say that your time is at a premium, and it's a very valuable resource that we don't wish to misspend. And my perspective personally is that you maximizing the effectiveness of the district staff time by making this move as quickly and efficiently as possible and as sensibly as possible in alignment with the bigger vision is really, in my opinion, a better use of your time than drilling down into the fine details of how it all adds up, because that would be an investment of likely Dan's time that I'd rather have him spending on other things personally.
Okay.
Christy, I noticed the link on the website doesn't work. Oh, that would explain it. So, so how does one go from the website to that form other than having to type in that whole CKT4 thing?
Yeah, that's just a picture. So we have another question. Is the district looking for a special education director? No, and all families were notified in the special education department that we have 2 teachers on special assignment who are sharing the day-to-day oversight of special education, and any administrative oversight necessary will come from me. And it was a job that I have done in my past life, and I welcome the opportunity to do it again.
Thank you.
Are there any further comments or questions on the budget presentation and the budget going forward? Okay, we'll move.
Just one process question. How do you get input from staff and district employees when you're working on the budget, like on either for this process or like on an ongoing basis?
It happens all year long. Dan and I meet with our administrative team every week, and they in turn meet with their staff. Dan and I also met with the entire district staff to talk about where we are with the budget and what we saw coming down the road. The athletic department was given the opportunity to meet with the athletic director on their budget. So it goes from the general discussion at the district level. We also involve our unions, keep them informed of what's happening. And then these meetings keep the public informed. So, and as the board knows, we operate in 3 budgets at all times. So Dan is always in the midst of 3. He will be closing out a budget. He will be within a budget in the current year, and then always preparing for the following year's budget. So that cycle never stops.
Thank you. I appreciate all the work you put into the budget and the presentation.
A further question from Gwendy Hastings. She says, I am aware of the 2 teachers stepping in, but I was wondering if this was temporary.
We are going to work with this framework for a year and see if it works well, and then reassess.
Okay. Anything else on the budget process? We'll move on to the bond preposition, which is the last item on our workshop. And this is following on from a question that the board had for Dr. Moshe to investigate about putting a contingent memorandum on the ballot. Dr. Moshe.
Yes, at the last meeting, the board asked me to pursue with council whether or not we could split this bond in 2. And if we did, could we make it contingent that we have the main proposition, which is proposition 1, and only if that passes, and proposition 2, then proposition 2, if it passes, would be implemented. If proposition 1 doesn't pass, then neither could pass. And in fact, council was able to come up with a plan that allows for that. So Dan and I worked on the bond proposal with what the board framed as first priority, second priority. First priority came to 59 million. I don't have the exact number, but 59 million and change, and is the major necessary repairs, roof, siding, urgent things. And then 19.8 million essentially is the covered outdoor areas, the accessible playground, and all the stadium upgrades. So we have it separated in that way and built that way. The board can certainly tweak it if it chooses, but I think we met what the board was looking for. So we've put it in the form of amendment to your former proposition that you passed last time. So it's for your consideration. It is on the agenda for the special meeting if you choose to go in that direction, and happy to show you exactly how Dan really, let's be honest, came up with the numbers. But we divided it by what we thought would make most reasonable sense.
And I just want to take the time to thank, I believe it's Ashley, Jen, I was way off, I'm sorry. I want to thank Jen, who's in the audience here, because splitting the bond came from you, and wanted to acknowledge that your idea got this ball rolling. So thank you.
And I feel confident in the fact that you can't get two if you didn't pick one.
Well, and I actually think that this makes it more likely that we will get both, quite honestly, because I think that it shows a consideration to the concerns of the community about the value, and also to what would be, speaks to what exactly what would be done with each part of it, which was another concern from the community. So I think that, thank you very much, Jen, for this, the idea that started this, because I think it will make it more likely that both of these measures pass.
I think in theory, I agree with you. I think in practice, a lot of voters, low information voters, are going to look at this and not read the fine print and vote on the smaller price tag one, because who'd want more taxes when you could have less, or vote yes on the second one and leave the first one undervoted. I'm actually concerned that we might undermine our efforts to raise bond funds, just due to just the political nature, the political reality of the number of low information voters that are going to be voting in a November ballot.
So this is our opportunity to discuss whether we want to do this. Let's see, there's a comment here from,
It's all on the general election ballot, so it's no additional cost to run it as one or two.
thank you, getting ahead of me for answering the community question, yes. Are there comments, discussion points, anything along those lines? Do we feel comfortable with the division between the urgent and the necessary?
I really appreciate the perspective of Director Greenhair, and you know, as a voter who does read the fine print and comes prepared to vote, I would love to see this broken down on the ballot, because I feel like it gives me as a voter more choice, and as a homeowner and as a parent in our district. As a observing trends in terms of voter engagement, in terms of how many people turn out to vote and how many of those people who do turn out to vote are likely to be slowing down enough to read the fine print, I do wonder if the instructions might be easy to misconstrue. And it would be really, in my personal opinion, it would be devastating for our students not to get the vital projects funded. So I wonder what our community will be prepared to do to educate the public about this. If this is complicated, perhaps in a really lovely way, by the presence of two propositions rather than one. I just am curious what community effort could come around, not the district's effort, but the community's effort to come around educating voters.
And in my conversation today with Piper Sandler, the company that does the bond numbers for us, he had a similar concern in that, in his experience, and not always, but in his experience, it splits the vote sometimes, where people, you don't get as many votes because they're voting for, say, two instead of one and two, and then it invalidates. So he had a little concern he wanted to share to the board about doing a proposition like this.
This might be outside the scope of what we hope to discuss tonight, but what about running Proposition 1 in November and running Proposition 2 in February or April?
I have a concern with that, looking like we've gotten a bunch of money and we're asking for more. But I certainly think it's something we can do. I'm like, this is a workshop. we can discuss everything and anything. And I'm very curious about the input of those who are present, who are not on the elected board to get their feedback also.
I'm curious around who is responsible for writing the instructions.
So there's legal directives in the pamphlets, which are written by legal experts. And that's been presented in the memorandums that are attached to the agenda that I bet we can pull up. And it is legalese.
Yeah, you have to really read it.
And then there will be a pro and con statement associated that we will need to find community members to write.
It starts on page 10, what it'll look like in the, oh wait, I'm looking at a different document
no,
than that.
That's the proposition one. Yeah. No, I think that was the one that we wanted.
Yeah, it's the one with the specific. There it is.
Yeah, if you go to page 10, it shows the two of them next to each other. Sorry, page 9. It spans 2 pages, which again, we don't know how the ballot's going to be laid out in real life. Hopefully it wouldn't span 2 pages like that. I think that would be very confusing. But I think what you're saying is, unfortunately, we couldn't do something like give it a helpful name, like bond number 1. Don't forget to also cast your vote for bond number 2. Read below, don't skip it.
Yeah, I wanted something like in all caps at bond 2, it like really explaining that this is contingent on that in all caps on top.
So the pro statement, whoever of the community chooses to write that could certainly have that information.
It'd be nice if we could arrange for the ballots to burst into flames if they try to vote on one without voting on the other.
We have a question here. I'll get to that in just a moment. I've got a question here from Gwendy. If you split it into 2 separate items for people to vote on, won't that make it harder to get your percentage you need? I don't know that it would, unless there are people who are voting for one and not the other. But if there are people who vote for one and not the other, that would be a problem, because it would be the total number of people voting. And then first we would need to consider for Proposition 1, meet the 40% of the last general election. And then for Proposition 1, meeting the 60% plus 1 vote yay votes. And then separately, Proposition 2 would have the same 2 hurdles to clear. So if
And
there
the
are
third hurdle of requiring passage of Proposition 1.
yes, exactly. Thank you.
It just a word of caution. It's very different than what people are used to. And it may confound the whole thing, because just reading it, you remember how when you read one of those advisory votes and they're worded in the, and you don't know if you're supposed to vote yes or no to get what you want. It's just one of those things where the cleaner and more straightforward we are, I think the better off we're going to be. But I wanted to give you the options.
Did we have a comment from Mr. Carruthers?
Yeah. Thank you.
Yes, it would be very easy if one were to just simply vote on Proposition 1 or Proposition 2. But it sounds like that's not simple, not going to be that simple. I, as a community member, just speaking from them, it has to be simple. You don't want to complicate something like that. It's almost like politics. You want to cut your losses.
Yeah, the simple version would be something with 3 options where it's none, it's simple, rather than having 2 different propositions where it's none, the 60 million and the 79.8 million.
What we need is ranked choice approval.
2 things that I've been thinking about. +1 on the simpler the better. I'm feeling that is what my intuition is saying. I don't have any models or experience around that. in this venue. But the first thing is that my understanding was one of the major barriers in some of the folks that I was talking to were either that they did not understand that this funding silo is a separate funding silo from everything else we do. This is money specifically for this project. The other barrier was that people did not know that it was coming because it was a, kind of a, special, thank you, words, special election. And so I feel like that barrier in particular can hopefully be overcome by the community this time, because there is a little more time to get the word out there. There's other things on the ballot that will be important to people. And so they will naturally have ballot in front of them and hopefully be educated about this particular bond for the kids. The other thing for me is a little more amorphous and metaphysical, but I was thinking about, vital projects. Vital projects are absolutely, when you look at, basic needs, having a roof over your head, being warm, feeling safe, those are things that are basic needs. That having been said, part of our inclusion practices and our community of care practices that we continue to work through are what make kids whole in their spaces, what builds trust, what builds resilience, what builds kids into people who can go out into the world after they graduate and be fully successful. For some of those kids, it's sports. For some of those kids, it's having the independence to drive themselves to school and have a safe parking lot to park in. For some of those kids, it is the sensory need of having a classroom that is, heat regulated. And so, when we look at the word vital, there's the materially vital things like roofs, and there's the sensorily and emotionally and mentally vital things, which are having facilities that are modern, clean, and build confidence. And it's a place where kids want to go every day.
Director Johnson, I appreciate that, because I've been sitting here trying to think, what would our student representatives say if they were with us tonight? And as a person who didn't play school sports, I look at the price tag for the stadium and can't connect it to my lived experience of value. And yet I hear again and again from our students an expression of a feeling of shame when they welcome other teams to facilities that feel run down and frankly embarrassing. And so I don't want the fact that I wasn't a school organized sports participant to shape my judgment about what is an important ingredient in a public education. And I think a sense of pride of place is something that we've heard again and again pointed to from our students as a primary object in this whole bond approach.
And I would even say it goes beyond being proud of it. They couldn't play playoff games at home by the end of the season because of the state of the field. So they were losing out on that entire home playoff experience, not just being ashamed of the facilities. So yeah, I look at these not as the necessary and the nice, but as the urgent and necessary. Like they're both necessary, but one of them is urgent, like health urgent. One of them is necessary, but if it happens in 2 years, it won't have degraded further necessarily.
Yeah, I just wanted to put that out. I just wanted to put that out there as part of the big picture, and part of the reason why looking at this as two separate things may not feel like it's as inclusive as having it as one package.
Superintendent Mokja, at the last meeting, if I recall correctly, you mentioned that you had been contacted by a director from the Park and Recreation District, that there was a potential for duplication of things in the school bond and in their proposed but not yet documented February school bond, Park and Recreation bond. Can you elaborate on that and give us a current status?
I can tell you what I heard at that time from one commissioner. I don't know what Park and Rec has done to date. But at that time, I know they were discussing a multipurpose room that is like a gymnasium. They're talking about a pool. They're talking about a turf field. Some of the same things we're doing. And he and I talked about being more cooperative and having the use of school facilities and parks facilities, and how could we work together. So there would be some duplication if they did all of that and we updated our turf field. But I guess my sense is that our stadium is in a state of disrepair. So I'm trying to answer your question, Rufus. I'm also trying to make the point that, you know, if and when you're ready for an opinion from your administrators, we'll be happy to provide it.
It seems to me it would be very prudent to take a formal position in writing by this board to that board, because you're in conflict and the public there may be people that vote that think it's a conflict. And if you will clarify this board's position regarding the communication that you have had from a member of that board, it may be helpful.
I hear you. I'm not sure I understand the conflict you see.
If I can just share that I've had some just one-on-one incidental conversations in the community, including with people who are involved with sports and use the district facilities and the Parks and Rec facilities, and including people who are involved in the Southwood Parks and Aquatics Foundation. And generally the reports that I'm getting are that there is a need. There's a need for facilities. There's a need for better maintained facilities, and there's a need for additional facilities. And so I agree that our efforts should be complementary, but I don't believe that improving our facilities is in competition with one another. And I think that we have good open communication channels and a lot of opportunity for collaboration and synchronization of schedules and facilities sharing and such. But I think that communication is already taking place.
And I think that's why they slowed down.
Right.
is-
And there's an opportunity to enrich our whole community by better collaborating, but there's also, it would be incorrect to assume that one facility meets all needs because of scheduling and demand restrictions.
Well, and I think that personally, I think that we should, as long as it's not duplication of effort, we should absolutely be supporting their efforts to provide for the community well-being, because we're looking to support these students and these families in school and out. And I think that there is absolutely overlap in how, not just overlap, but complementary nature to how the school district and the Parks and Recs can provide for this community.
Exactly. And our missions, though they are, in the same Venn diagram, they're different missions, and they're going to be a recreational facility for their whole community, adults and children. We are an educational facility for the district's children. So we need a stadium, we need a field, we need accessibility, we need new restrooms, we need a roof that doesn't leak, that's not past its prime by 10 years. That roof is going to be almost 40 by the time we would be able to get to it if this bond passes. So all of these things are essential. What you see in front of you is our attempt to give you a ballot broken down into two for you to see because you asked for it. In my humble opinion, the first bond we did was a necessary bond. The second one that you approved that is going on the ballot, whether you amend it or not, is necessary. There hasn't been a bond here since the 90s. The facilities need that kind of upgrading, not because we haven't been maintaining them, but because each of those things have passed their useful life, right? The roof, the siding, the bathrooms. I mean, if you didn't update your bathroom for 30 years, imagine what it would look like, maintenance or not. We've maintained them. They're clean. The tile's still good, but it's 50 years old in some places.
I don't want you to think that we sent you on like a Snape hunt or anything. I think it was a really good idea to investigate this. And it wasn't until I looked at the actual ballot layout that I realized that there's a chance that this would do more harm than good.
I want to also just remind everybody why we did this exercise, though, that there might not be public appetite for an $80 million bond. And we would rather have the absolute essentials that would be covered in the $60 million bond than nothing. So I think that's the assessment. Like, do we have the public appetite for it? If so, it might be better to go in a simpler route. Property taxes are up, inflation's high. Like, what's going to be the public appetite for passing it with, the urgent items in addition to the very essentials?
Yeah, thank you for that. And, it's impossible to have perfect foresight. And yet the trend that we were seeing as votes came in was creeping closer and closer, and so painfully extremely close to passage in a year where other communities fell really short of that 60% threshold. And we've had almost historically high voter turnout in the last couple general elections. And so I just feel like the fact that this is going to be a general election with a number of issues on the ballot, issues and candidates, is good for voter turnout. The fact that people know there's a ballot, they know why it's in their mailbox and how to participate, is going to be easier with the November cycle than in April. And I think that there's just been enough community recognition of the fact that, oh, what was that? A bond? I didn't even know about that. And now you're telling me we were talking about it for a year? How did I miss it? And now it's in the record again. And now we're talking about it again. And I just think there's a really high likelihood that many more people will have this on their radar this time around. So my gut says we're in a really strong position to go back to voters with a 79.8 million bond proposal and have it pass. So, and just as a private citizen, I plan to do a lot more for it this time around because I have bandwidth and passion for that. So my gut says we have a solid shot at the whole thing that we need.
Do we have any data, or where maybe could I find data around whether other districts who also fell short of the mark, are they putting their bonds back on the ballot anytime soon?
I don't know the answer to that question.
It's a good question, though.
I do have some updated tax rates from Pepper Sandler, because it changes a little bit from the last one just because of the projection and interest rates. So I can share that with you if you wanted to see it.
Yes, please.
About 72 cents. Based on that 79. Yeah, so he basically did a breakdown. If we did the 79.8 as one, it was 72 cents. If we did 60, it was 54, and the 19.8 was about 19 cents. So it gives you that idea. So again, on that $500,000 house, you're looking at, $30.17. I think below, last time we we're a little below 30. It was 29 and change. Yeah.
And just a note for anyone following along, the reason that 500,000 is selected, highlighted there is because that is the median property value on South Whidbey.
Yeah, so it's about $72 per year per 100,000 if you wanted to calculate it.
Comment from Charlene Davenport. People also need to realize that when the high school and North Campus elementary schools were built, mortgage interest rates were bet 10 to 18% in Washington, and we still passed the bonds.
What is the interest rate of this bond?
Let me look.
At the very bottom, slightly off the screen. Is that it down there?
5.53%. 5.59 and then 5.53 the second year. And that's assuming it's broken down over 2 issues.
So at the culmination of this discussion, we're looking to move into a special business meeting and decide whether or not to approve an amendment to last business meeting's resolution doing the single bond. And then after that, we will be doing a resolution expressing, voting on a resolution expressing support for whichever of the 2 versions we have chosen. Just to keep everyone involved in that. So whenever we're done with discussion, I see a lot of thoughtful faces among the voting board members, myself included, about the 2 options. So are there other things we feel like we need to discuss? If I can restate what I'm thinking of, just to help, I often think better talking through something, using y'all as the rubber duck in the programming metaphor, talking it out to someone. The question is whether or not the community has a willingness to pay for an $80 million bond versus preferring to have the option of a $60 million and a $19.8 million, and then versus having that control being a positive versus the likelihood of there being confusion and people voting for the 19.8 but not the 60, if both are on the ballot. That's what I've been cogitating over myself, and I'm quite honestly not sure where I fall out on that yet.
I think the third scenario that we could consider, running the 60 now and then the 20 later.
Yeah. And in my mind, that has the problem of you just asked for this. What are you doing asking
Yep.
for more?
Yeah,
And,
but it is a third.
but it is a
option.
third option. Yeah. There are absolutely positives and negatives to all of these, and I don't know that it's a clear-cut decision, at least for me.
And I think it's worth recalling that some districts do have multiple bonds running simultaneously. You know, sometimes a district will adopt, put a bond proposal out and have it approved by voters in concurrent years. So it's not unheard of. We just have had the luxury of not having a bond for 30 years, which is why our buildings look the way they do. I'm curious if there's any more input from the non-voting members present before we move into the next stage of our evening.
Specifically, I'd love to hear from the staff members who are here, not to put y'all on the spot, but you are vital members of this community with insight that we don't have.
Most of the feedback that I got was that people just didn't know. that they weren't aware, why we needed it and aware of, that there wasn't a lot of information out about it, despite all the efforts of the, meetings and such. But retirement community, a lot of folks didn't understand why we were running a bond.
Just that it was at a weird time of the year. I think it will do better at the general election.
I think just in hearing kind of perspectives and whatnots, the fact that it is a general election, what we could consider doing is running 79.8 for the general. Should that not pass, then we could break it down, and we could try and run a 60 in February, and then go for the 19 at the next general. Or I think I think we could scaffold back our approach in how we pass it.
That is a good backstop for running this 79.8. My concern there is that the additional costs of each election, but that is, if it passes, it's less of a concern. Yeah.
Well, and I think you can't go backwards, right?
Right.
So if you
Mhm.
put the 60 million up
Yep.
now
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
and
Absolutely.
it fails, you can't come back with 70.
Yep. Anyone who has not chimed in who'd like to at this point? Then we'll move out of the workshop unless there's anything else. Okay. This workshop is adjourned. I'm calling to order the special business meeting of South Louis School District. We have 2 items on the agenda. First is memorandum 2223-47, approval of the amended and restated resolution 674. This is the amendment to split it into 2 parts and the contingent parts. We've just had this discussion, but for form's sake, is there any discussion to be had for this? Okay.
I'm sure the board
Please.
is clear, but I just want to be clear. A yes vote would amend it, a no vote,
Correct.
we go forward with the 79 that you've already approved.
Correct.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you. Let me step aside and say, would the board like a roll call vote on this, an individual member by member, or do we think that a yays and nays will suit? I don't have a problem with either way. I don't know that it's necessary to do a roll call.
Either way.
No
Plus on
yeah,
that,
no-
just do
no
the normal.
strong, no strong opinions. Let's do it the normal way. Okay. Again, as Dr. Moshe said, a yay vote on this is amending it to split into a contingent. A nay vote is keeping it at the 79.8 or 78.9, 79.8, whatever the number is. All those in favor of approving memorandum 2223-47, approval of the amended and restated resolution 674, please say aye. All those opposed, please say nay.
Okay.
Nay.
Okay.
The memorandum has not been approved. The amendment has not been approved. The original amendment from last business meeting will carry through. That means we will need it. We're getting a tweak to this right now for the second one.
Fix the numbers, Christy.
Yeah. So we will.
1.
Yep. To just proposition 1 and the general obligation. So I will read it with those changes. Memorandum 2223-48. Approval of resolution 675, a resolution expressing support for passage of the district's proposition number 1, general obligation bond at the larger amount. This is just to state whether or not the school board and then thus the school district expresses its support for this bond measure as we did last time. Is there any discussion to be had on this? All those in favor of approving memorandum 2223-48, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, please say nay. The memorandum 2223-48 has been approved. That is the end of our business meeting. This meeting is adjourned. Thank you and good night.
Get offline, okay? Wait.